My mother's hand flew to her mouth the moment I walked into the hearing room. My father gripped the back of the chair in front of him. Grant went pale. For 12 years, they had believed I had quit the Navy after 8 months because I was too ashamed to admit I couldn't handle it. Now I was walking toward the government table in dress whites. Lieutenant Lucas Hale, United States Navy. 12 years of service. I had imagined seeing my parents again before. Not often. Usually in those quiet stretches when your mind gets tired enough to wander somewhere you stopped giving it permission to go. I had imagined my mother crying. My father looking older. Maybe an apology in a parking lot somewhere. I had never imagined fluorescent lights. Government-issued chairs. An NCIS evidence binder. And my older brother sitting across the room because 31 logistics records carrying his authorization had failed an audit. The room was almost painfully quiet. My shoes clicked against the polished floor as I carried the technical records folder to the front table. Special Agent Elena Torres was already there. LCDR Rebecca Sloan from JAG sat 2 seats away reviewing the evidentiary index. My role had been restricted carefully. I had disclosed the family connection the moment Grant's file reached my section. I would not recommend punishment. I would not decide charges. I was there to verify the logistics record and explain what the documentation actually showed. Nothing more. That mattered to me. I set the folder down. Squared it with the edge of the table. Then I finally looked back. Mom was still staring at my uniform. Dad's eyes had moved to the rank insignia at my collar. Grant looked like someone had opened a door he had spent 12 years convincing himself was permanently locked. For one long second, nobody moved. Then the hearing officer entered. Everyone stood. And I realized something strange. The first time my family would hear the truth about me in 12 years, I would not have to explain myself at all. The uniform had already done that. I should tell you about Franklin, Virginia, because that is where all of this started. Not in a courtroom. Not in a Navy office. Not with an NCIS file. It started in a small town where people remembered your last name before they remembered your face. There were families who had known each other for generations, teachers who had taught both your parents, neighbors who could tell you which Hale boy was going places before either of us was old enough to drive. Grant was always the one they meant. Grant Hale was 4 years older than me, 6'1", broad through the shoulders, easy smile, easy laugh. He knew how to make adults feel interesting. Teachers liked him. Coaches gave him second chances. My mother could be furious with him at breakfast and defending him by lunch. If Grant lost a job, he had been treated unfairly. If he drank too much, he was going through something. If he forgot a responsibility, somebody should have reminded him. Nobody ever called it favoritism. Families almost never do while they are inside it. I was the serious one. Lucas works too hard. Lucas needs to loosen up. Lucas takes everything personally. I heard versions of that from the time I was a kid. The truth was simpler. I liked structure. I liked knowing what was expected of me. I liked work where effort and result were connected by something more reliable than charm. At 20, I enlisted in the Navy as a logistics specialist. I had other options. I had started community college and could have stayed. But my father had spent most of his adult life at a manufacturing plant that eliminated his position with almost no warning. I remember watching him sit at the kitchen table with the termination letter in front of him, reading the same paragraph again and again. That image stayed with me. I wanted to build something portable. Training. Rank. Experience. A record nobody could erase because they were having a bad quarter. I told my parents on a Sunday afternoon. Mom was making chicken and dumplings. Dad sat across from me with both hands around a coffee mug. When I said I had signed the enlistment papers, he was quiet for a few seconds. Then he nodded. "I'm proud of you." My mother cried. Happy tears. She hugged me hard enough that my chin hit her shoulder. Grant was not there. He had called earlier saying he was dealing with something. That was common enough that nobody questioned it. 3 weeks later, I was at Great Lakes. I wrote home every week. Mom answered on yellow legal pads, 4 or 5 pages at a time. Dad sent short notes. Stay sharp. Work hard. Proud of you. For the first 8 months, there was no fracture. No rejection. No family feud. My parents were proud that I was serving. That matters. Because what happened next only worked because Grant first had to destroy something they already believed in. I did not know Grant was destroying my place in the family while it was happening. That is the part that stayed with me longest. By the time I came home for Christmas, the story had already been built around me. Grant had spent 8 months watching our parents become proud of something that had nothing to do with him. Every letter Mom read aloud. Every short phone call from me after duty. Every time Dad mentioned that his youngest son was serving. Grant heard all of it. And somewhere along the way, being the favorite stopped being enough. He needed to be the only son they were proud of. So he told them I had quit. Not in some ridiculous way that would immediately collapse under questions. Grant was too good at people for that. He said he had heard through someone connected to Norfolk that I was struggling. That Navy life had been harder than I expected. That I had started the discharge process but was too embarrassed to tell anyone. Then he added the part that made the lie almost impossible for me to fight. If Lucas denies it, don't push him. He's ashamed. That sentence protected everything. If I admitted it, Grant was right. If I denied it, I was supposedly too ashamed to admit the truth. A few weeks before Christmas, Mom called me. Her voice was different. Soft. Careful. She kept asking if I was okay. I remember standing outside the barracks thinking she was worried because I sounded tired. I had no idea I was already defending myself against an accusation nobody had told me existed. I drove back to Franklin on Christmas Eve. Dad met me at the front door. He did not smile. Grant stood several feet behind him in the hallway. "Your mother and I know," Dad said. "Know what?" His face changed. That disappointment hurt more than anger would have. "We raised you better than to lie to us." I actually laughed once because I thought there had been some misunderstanding. Then he said Grant had told them I had left the Navy. I told him that was insane. I told him I was still serving. I could show him my ID. My orders. Anything he wanted. Dad looked past me for half a second. Grant slowly shook his head. Not smugly. That would have been easier. He looked sad. Concerned. Like he was watching his younger brother embarrass himself exactly the way he had warned them I would. "Lucas," Mom said from somewhere behind Dad, "you don't have to keep doing this." That was when I understood. There was no sentence I could say that Grant had not already explained for them. Dad stepped backward. Then he closed the door. I stood on the porch for several minutes with my overnight bag still in my hand. I could hear people moving around inside. Christmas music. A cabinet opening. Normal life continuing 10 feet away from me. I drove to a motel on the edge of town. The heater rattled every time it kicked on. I sat on the bed until after midnight, still wearing my jacket, staring at the blank television screen. Something in me eventually became very still. Not healed. Not numb. Just clear. I could spend the next several years begging people to believe the truth. Or I could return to the place where the truth was already documented. So the next morning, I drove back toward Norfolk. And I went back to work. People hear the outline of what happened and ask whether those 12 years destroyed me. I understand the question. But it is the wrong one. The better question is what I built while that door stayed closed. I do not want to turn those years into some clean success story. They were not clean. There were deployments when I would be awake before 0500, surrounded by hundreds of people, and somehow feel completely alone. There were Christmas mornings when I checked my phone, even though I knew nobody from Franklin was going to call. The first year, I sent a card. Just, "Merry Christmas. I love you. I'm still here." No accusation. No explanation. No demand for an apology. Nothing came back. The second year, I sent another. Then another. 1 year, the envelope came back marked "Return to Sender." I stood in the mailroom holding it longer than I want to admit. After that, I stopped putting my return address on the cards. I still sent one every December. That way they could throw it away without sending the rejection back to me. I made petty officer second class in my 4th year. My chief at the time, Harold Mercer, called me into his office after the promotion. He looked at my evaluation, then at me. "Hale, you know what your problem is?" "No, Chief." "You think being dependable means you never get tired." I almost smiled. "That's not how it works." He tapped the paper. "You're good. Just don't turn being useful into a way of disappearing." I remembered that sentence. Not immediately, but eventually. I finished my bachelor's degree one class at a time. Online courses after duty. Assignments written in berthing spaces, airport terminals, empty offices, wherever I could get enough signal and 40 quiet minutes. By my 7th year, I had the degree. A year later, I was selected for officer candidate school. Newport was cold when I arrived. I was 28 and older than some of the candidates by enough that they called me Grandpa for the first 2 weeks. I did not care. I had spent most of my 20s learning that embarrassment only controls you if you agree to participate in it. When I commissioned into the Supply Corps, Lucy was 3. She sat in the audience beside her mother, Megan, wearing a red coat and kicking her shoes against the chair because her feet did not touch the floor. Megan and I had been together for several years. We were good people who were bad at building the same life. My schedule was brutal. She wanted roots. Neither of us was wrong. When we finally separated, we managed to do it without turning Lucy into evidence against each other. Megan moved to Richmond. Lucy stayed with me part of the school year, and with her mother on a schedule we adjusted whenever the Navy decided my calendar belonged to somebody else. I consider that one of the things I am most proud of. Not because it was easy. Because it would have been easy to make it ugly. By year 12, I was a lieutenant. 03. Supply Corps. I had crossed oceans, managed logistics operations that involved more moving pieces than anything in Franklin had ever taught me to imagine. I had people calling me sir who did not know there had once been a Christmas when my own father would not let me through his front door. And every milestone had the same strange shape. Promotion ceremonies, awards, commissioning. Lucy in the front row. Megan sometimes there if the schedule worked. Shipmates. Friends. Mentors. And, somewhere in the room, 2 seats I never actually reserved but always noticed anyway. One for my mother. One for my father. I kept telling myself I had stopped expecting them. Maybe that was true. Mostly. Then, 12 years after that Christmas, a file landed in my section. I looked down at the cover sheet. Hail, Grant Michael, Petty Officer First Class, Logistics Documentation Review, ****. For a few seconds, I thought there had to be another Grant Hale. Then I checked the date of birth. Franklin, Virginia. My brother had joined the Navy 5 years after convincing our parents that I had failed at it. And now his record was sitting on my desk. The file reached my section on a Monday morning in February. Nothing dramatic about it. No phone call. No warning. Just another digital case package routed for logistics compliance review because the allegations crossed multiple commands and somebody needed to verify whether the records actually meant what investigators believed they meant. The subject line read, Hail, Grant Michael, LS1. Falsified receipt and inspection documentation, ****. I read the name twice. Then I checked the date of birth. Franklin, Virginia. Same middle name. Same brother. Grant had joined the Navy 5 years after I did. 5 years after telling our parents I could not survive 8 months in uniform. He had eventually made Petty Officer First Class. E6. That mattered. You do not accidentally reach E6. Grant had passed exams, earned evaluations, learned systems, supervised people. Whatever else he was not incompetent. Which made the file worse. The investigation covered 17 months. Grant had been responsible for verifying receipt and inspection records for equipment moving through an Atlantic Fleet installation. Replacement electronics. Safety equipment. Maintenance assemblies. Specialized components. His authorization appeared on 31 certifications. According to those records, equipment had arrived. Been inspected. Matched specifications. Entered inventory. The problem was that the supporting data did not agree. Some items arrived days or weeks after Grant certified them. Some had been routed to different units. Several inspection timestamps did not match access logs. 2 witnesses stated they had specifically told Grant that shipments had not yet been verified. The total equipment exposure was approximately $286,000. That did not mean Grant stole $286,000. The case did not say that. Some equipment had eventually been located. Some was delayed. Some was sitting under the wrong unit's inventory. What the investigators could show was simpler. Grant had certified things he had not actually verified. Then, when discrepancies appeared, additional records seemed to have been created to make earlier records look less wrong. I had seen that pattern before. Not in logistics. In my family. When reality became inconvenient, Grant did not correct reality. He corrected the story. The NCIS lead investigator was Special Agent Elena Torres. Her report was the kind professionals appreciate because it did not need adjectives. Dates. Authorization codes. Witness statements. System logs. 31 records. 17 months. Every conclusion tied to something that could be checked. I had been reading for maybe 12 minutes when I stopped. Closed the file. Then called Captain Marcus Bennett. He told me to come upstairs. I was in his office 10 minutes later. You're related to the subject? Yes, sir. He's my older brother. How close? We haven't spoken in 12 years. Bennett studied me for a moment. That answer doesn't eliminate the conflict. I know, sir. What do you recommend? I had already thought about it on the walk upstairs. Remove me from anything involving charges, discipline, or disposition. I shouldn't recommend an outcome. He nodded once. And the technical review? I can verify the logistics records if legal is comfortable with it. The system data doesn't care who my brother is. That almost made him smile. Almost. I'll run it through JAG. Yes, sir. He leaned back. You understand your parents may attend whatever proceeding comes out of this. There are sentences you can prepare for intellectually and still feel physically. My hand stayed still. Yes, sir. You want someone else to do the entire review? For 1 second, I saw my father's front door. The motel heater. 12 Christmas cards disappearing into silence. Then I looked back at Captain Bennett. I want the conflict documented, I said, and I want the process clean. He nodded. That's the right answer. By noon, JAG had approved a limited role. I could verify the technical record. I could explain the logistics systems. I would have no say in punishment. No charging recommendation. No final disposition. So I returned to my desk. Opened Grant's file again. And started at page 1. I thought the hardest part would be reading what my brother had done. I was wrong. The hardest part was waiting on page 61. I almost missed page 61. That is what still bothers me. It sat inside the administrative appendix behind duty history, account permissions, emergency contact updates, and archive correspondence. Nothing about it looked important. Then I saw my father's email address. I stopped scrolling. The message had been sent from Grant's Navy account in March 2019. 7 years earlier. The subject line was ordinary. Something I need to correct. I opened it. The first sentence changed the entire story. Lucas never quit the Navy. I read it again. Then the next line. I told you he did. Grant wrote that he had been jealous. That he had watched Mom and Dad become proud of me and could not stand no longer being the only son they looked at that way. He admitted I had still been serving when Dad closed the door on me that Christmas. He admitted I had been telling the truth. And then he wrote something I was not prepared for. He didn't deserve what I did to him. I leaned back from the screen. For several minutes, I did nothing. There was no dramatic reaction. No desk slammed. No phone thrown across the room. I just stared at the wall while 12 years reorganized themselves in my head. Because the email itself was not the worst part. The metadata was. Delivered successfully. David Hale. Susan Hale. March 2019. 7 years ago. My parents had received the truth. Not a rumor. Not an explanation from me they could dismiss as another lie. Grant's own confession. And they had still said nothing. I thought about every Christmas card I mailed after 2019. Every year I convinced myself maybe Grant's lie still had them trapped. Every time I tried to be fair to people who did not know better. They had known better. For 7 years. I read the delivery record 3 times, because some part of me kept looking for a technical reason it might mean something else. Wrong mailbox. Failed delivery. Anything. There wasn't one. Grant had created the lie. But my parents had been given a chance to end it. They chose silence instead. That was the moment the story stopped being only about my brother. I did not sleep the night before Grant's hearing. Not because I was afraid of seeing him. I had spent enough years imagining that possibility that his face no longer frightened me. It was my parents I could not stop thinking about. Lucy was staying with me that week. By 10, she was asleep down the hall. Her bedroom door cracked open because she insisted she was too old for a night light, but apparently not too old to need hallway light. I sat at the kitchen table with Grant's file, my technical summary, and a yellow legal pad. The same kind my mother used when she wrote to me during my first months in the Navy. I worked through the evidence again. 31 certifications. Access logs. Receipt dates. Witness statements. Inventory discrepancies. My job the next morning was narrow. Explain the systems. Verify what the records showed. Answer questions honestly. Nothing about Grant's punishment belonged to me. That boundary helped. Numbers were easier than memory. At 1:38 a.m., I stopped pretending I was still reviewing the case. I was reading the 2019 email again. Lucas never quit the Navy. 7 years. That was the number I could not make behave. For the first 5 years after Dad closed that door, I could tell myself my parents believed a lie. After 2019, they had known. So I tried to give them every explanation I could think of. Maybe Dad had been ashamed. Maybe Mom had wanted to call, and he stopped her. Maybe they had waited too long, and every additional month made the first sentence harder to imagine. Maybe admitting Grant had lied also meant admitting they had chosen him over me without checking a single fact. People can spend years protecting themselves from one sentence. I was wrong. I understood that. Understanding it did not make the silence smaller. At 2:16, I closed the file. I stood by the kitchen window and watched an empty parking lot under orange streetlights. For 12 years, I had treated fairness like discipline. Do not assume motives. Do not turn pain into evidence. Do not make people worse in your head simply because they hurt you. That night, fairness meant admitting something I had avoided. Grant caused the separation. My parents chose to continue it. At 05:45, I showered and put on my dress whites. I checked every ribbon twice. Not for them. For me. Lucy appeared in the doorway while I was adjusting my collar. Her hair was sticking up on one side. She stared at me. "You look extremely official." I laughed once. "That's the idea." "Is this the thing with Uncle Grant?" She knew only that there was a Navy hearing involving a relative she had never met. Yeah. She considered that. "Will you be home for dinner?" The question hit me harder than anything in page 61. Because 12 years ago, I had stood outside my parents' house wanting somebody inside to choose me. Now an 8-year-old was standing in my hallway assuming I would come back. Yes, I said. I'll be home for dinner. She nodded. Okay, we're doing tacos. Then she walked toward the kitchen. I picked up my cover and looked at myself once more in the mirror. My parents were going to see me for the first time in 12 years. But Lucy had already reminded me of the only thing that mattered after the hearing ended. I had somewhere to come home to. The hearing room looked less dramatic in daylight than it had in my head. No polished wood, no raised judge's bench, fluorescent lights, government chairs, gray carpet, and the faint smell of floor cleaner. That helped. Drama belonged to television. Procedure belonged here. Special Agent Elena Torres sat at the government table with 3 binders in front of her. LCDR Rebecca Sloan from JAG reviewed the witness sequence. I took the seat assigned to me beside the logistics exhibits. Grant sat across the room with appointed defense counsel. Dress blues. E6 insignia. Hands folded tightly in front of him. I had not seen my brother in 12 years. He was heavier through the face, his hairline farther back, but the habit of rubbing his thumb against his index finger was exactly the same. He used to do it when Dad caught him in something. My parents entered 2 minutes before the hearing began. Dad wore a gray suit. Mom wore a dark blue cardigan. They were looking at Grant when they sat down. Then Mom saw me. Her hand covered her mouth. Dad's eyes went to my uniform, then my shoulder boards, then my face. Grant followed their stare. For half a second, his expression emptied. That was the moment from the beginning of this story. Then the hearing officer entered, everyone stood, and 12 years of private damage became irrelevant to the schedule. The Navy moved on time. Torres testified first. She did not tell a story. She built one out of facts. 31 receipt and inspection certifications carrying Grant's authorization. 17 months. Approximately $286,000 in equipment exposure. She walked through access logs showing that several certifications had been entered before shipments reached the installation. Replacement electronics had been certified 6 days before receiving personnel scanned them into the facility. Safety assemblies had been marked inspected while the assigned inspection bay was closed for maintenance. Several components were logged to one unit, while transportation records showed they had been rerouted elsewhere. None of that automatically meant theft. Torres said that clearly. The issue was certification. Grant had signed records saying he verified conditions the system showed he could not have verified. Then came the witnesses. A second-class petty officer said he warned Grant that a shipment had not arrived. What did Petty Officer Hale tell you? To certify the staging record anyway, ma'am. He said the paperwork would catch up. Another witness said Grant asked him to use the purchase order date instead of the physical delivery date. A third said Grant called the discrepancies timing problems. I wrote notes even though I already knew the records. Every few minutes, I could feel my parents looking at me. I did not look back. When Sloan called me, she established the conflict first. Lieutenant Hale, are you related to Petty Officer First Class Grant Hale? Yes, ma'am. He is my brother. Were you involved in recommending charges or punishment? No, ma'am. What was your role? Technical verification. I reviewed system timestamps, receipt histories, inspection requirements, routing data, and authorization records. She put the first certification on the screen. I explained what each field meant. What should happen when equipment arrived? Who could certify it? What the timestamp proved? What it did not prove. I never said Grant stole anything. I never called him dishonest. I did not need to. The records were enough. By the time the hearing recessed, my throat was dry. I stepped into the hallway toward the water fountain. Lucas. My mother's voice stopped me. I turned. She stood 6 feet away, staring at my uniform. You're still in the Navy. It was not really a question. Yes, ma'am. Dad came up beside her. What rank is that? Lieutenant. Oh, 3. How long? 12 years. Mom closed her eyes. Dad looked down at the floor. I could have told them about Great Lakes, deployments, OCS, the commissioning ceremony they missed, Lucy sitting in the front row. I did not. The courtroom door opened. Grant walked out with his attorney behind him. He stopped. For Hales in one hallway. The first time in 12 years. Dad turned toward him. Why? Grant looked at Dad. Then Mom. Then me. He rubbed the back of his neck. Same gesture. Same boy caught in something. I don't know. Dad's voice got quieter. Try again. Grant swallowed. Because he was doing better than me. Nobody spoke. You kept talking about him, Grant said. His letters. Boot camp. Norfolk. Dad telling people he was proud. I was screwing everything up, and he was doing fine. He gave a short, empty laugh. I couldn't stand it. Mom's face changed. Not shock anymore. Recognition. Grant looked at me. I didn't think it would go that far. That made me speak. Which part? He frowned. The lie that cost me my family for 12 years. I kept my voice level. Or falsifying records until you put your Navy career in this room. His attorney shifted but did not interrupt. Grant looked directly at me. For once, there was no explanation prepared. No softer version. Both, he said. I believed him. That surprised me. It did not fix anything. Remorse is not a time machine. But I believed him. Dad leaned against the wall. Mom started to say my name. The hearing room door opened. Lieutenant Hale, we're ready to resume. I looked at my parents. Then Grant. There were 1,000 things 12 years might have entitled me to say. I chose none of them. I straightened the front of my uniform. Excuse me. Then I walked back into the room. Grant's confession belonged to the hallway. The evidence belonged to the record. For the first time, I understood exactly how different those two things were. After the hearing ended, I had one decision left to make. Page 61 was not part of Grant's misconduct case. The 2019 email had nothing to do with falsified receipt records, equipment routing, or whether Grant had certified inspections he never performed. Legally, it was irrelevant. Personally, it changed everything. I could have gone home. I could have let my parents leave believing Grant had finally confessed in that hallway and never told them I knew they had received the truth 7 years earlier. For a few minutes, that seemed easier. Then I printed 2 pages. Grant's email, and the delivery record. I found Mom and Dad in the parking lot near their car. Grant had already left with his attorney. Dad looked at the papers in my hand. What's that? Something from Grant's file. I handed them to him. This was not used in the hearing. Dad began reading. Mom moved closer beside him. I watched his eyes stop on the first line. Lucas never quit the Navy. His jaw tightened. He kept reading. Grant admitting he lied. Grant admitting jealousy. Grant saying I had been telling the truth that Christmas. Then Dad reached the delivery information. March 2019. David Hale. Susan Hale. Delivered. He looked at the date again. Then at Mom. Then at me. You knew, I said. It was not an accusation. I did not need to make it one. Dad folded the paper once. His hands were shaking slightly. Mom turned away and pressed her fingers against her mouth. For 7 years, I had imagined them trapped inside Grant's lie. That story was gone now. Dad finally spoke. I don't know what to say. I looked at him. There probably isn't anything you can say today. He nodded. Mom turned back toward me. We should have called. Yes. Her eyes filled. We should have called the day we got it. Yes. I could have asked why. Part of me wanted to. But I already knew whatever answer they gave would not return 7 years. Shame. Fear. Pride. Cowardice. None of those explanations changed the calendar. The wind coming off the water cut across the parking lot. For a while, the three of us just stood there. Then I thought about Lucy. 8 years old. Probably at school. Probably wondering whether tacos still counted as dinner if I got home late. My parents had missed most of my adult life. I could not give that back to them. But I could decide what happened next. Do you want to meet Lucy? Mom stared at me. Dad looked up sharply. My daughter, I said. She's 8. Mom answered before Dad could. Yes. Her voice broke. Yes, please. I nodded. That doesn't fix anything. I know. It doesn't mean we go back to normal. Mom swallowed. I know. There was no normal to go back to. That was the point. But for the first time in 12 years, I was not standing outside a closed door. I was deciding whether to open one. Only a few inches. For now, that was enough. Grant's Navy career ended 3 months after the hearing. The legal process was less dramatic than people imagine these things being. No shouting. No handcuffs in a courtroom. No final speech from me while everyone watched. The evidence simply kept moving through the system. Special Agent Torres completed the investigative record. JAG reviewed it. Grant's defense challenged portions of the documentation, but the core findings held. 31 false certifications. Repeated discrepancies. Witnesses who had warned him that equipment had not been received or verified. System records showing certifications entered before inspections could have happened. Eventually, Grant accepted an agreement rather than take every allegation through a full contested proceeding. His consequences included reduction in rank, forfeiture of part of his pay, a formal reprimand, and separation from the Navy under an adverse characterization. He did not go to prison. He had not stolen $286,000 and hidden it in an account somewhere. Most of the equipment was eventually located. Some had been redirected to other units. Some arrived late. Some had been entered under incorrect inventory records. Grant's real offense was what he had always been good at: changing the record when reality became inconvenient. One early certification created a discrepancy. Instead of admitting it, he created another record to cover the first. Then another. Eventually, the paperwork became a structure he could no longer hold up. The strange part was how familiar that felt. 12 years earlier, Grant had done the same thing with me. One lie. Then another explanation to protect it. Then years of silence required to keep the original story standing. I never celebrated what happened to him. I also never tried to save him from it. Those were two different things. Grant moved back to Franklin after his separation. We did not speak. My parents came to see Lucy a few weeks later. Mom arrived carrying a Dutch oven wrapped in 2 towels inside an old canvas grocery bag. I recognized it before she opened the lid. Chicken and dumplings. Same recipe she made when Grant and I were kids. The smell filled my apartment, and for 1 second I was 20 years old again, sitting at the kitchen table before any of this had happened. That feeling disappeared almost immediately. But I noticed it. Lucy noticed everything else. She stood in the living room studying my parents like they were 2 exchange students I had brought home without warning. "So you're my grandparents?" Dad nodded. "I suppose we are." She looked at him. "What's your favorite dinosaur?" Dad blinked. Mom laughed for the first time since arriving. "Brontosaurus," he said. Lucy frowned. "I think you mean Brachiosaurus." Dad looked at me for help. I gave him none. He nodded seriously. Then Brachiosaurus. That seemed to satisfy her. Within 20 minutes, she had him sitting at the dining table while she explained Navy ranks from a chart she had drawn herself. Most of it was wrong. Dad listened like she was briefing him before deployment. Mom stayed in the kitchen with me. Neither of us knew where to stand at first. That is the part nobody explains about reconciliation. The big emotional moment is easy to imagine. The ordinary minutes afterward are harder. Do you hug? Do you make coffee? Do you talk about 12 lost years while your daughter asks from the next room whether captains outrank admirals? Mom eventually sat at my kitchen table. There was a yellow legal pad beside my laptop. She touched the corner of it. "I used to write your letters on these." "I know." She looked up. "I kept them. All of them. Every one you sent before things stopped." I nodded. "I kept yours too." Her face tightened. I knew exactly what she was thinking about. The Christmas cards. The one returned to sender. All the others that had disappeared without acknowledgement. "I kept those too," she said quietly. That hurt more than if she had told me she threw them away. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Then why didn't you call?" Mom looked at her hands. For a long time, she did not answer. Finally, she said, "Because when Grant first told us, your father and I thought we were protecting you from humiliation." I said nothing. Then we got his email. 7 years ago. Yes. Her voice dropped. And suddenly calling Mint admitting we had done something terrible to you. You had. I know. She did not argue. That mattered. She continued. Every month we waited made it harder. Then every year made it worse. I kept thinking there would be a better way to start. A better time. Something I could say that would make the first 5 years less unforgivable. She looked directly at me. There wasn't. No. I know that now. I could have forgiven her at that table. Maybe that is what a cleaner story would require. I did not. Forgiveness is not something I can manufacture because the scene feels appropriate. What I could do was let her stay. Let Dad finish listening to Lucy explain why aircraft carriers were basically floating cities. Let us eat dinner together. Let the first visit be only the first visit. That was enough. There was one more thing in Grant's file that I had not shown them. A second email. Sent in 2023. For years after the confession. Grant had written Mom and Dad again. This time, there was no apology. Just information. My rank. My duty station. My unit. Enough information that finding me would have taken one phone call, one letter, one internet search through official channels. Grant had been leaving breadcrumbs. Not enough courage to repair what he had broken himself, but enough to make sure our parents could find the trail. They still had not followed it. I do not know what to do with that information. Maybe nothing. For years, I thought Healing meant reaching a final answer about everyone. Grant was jealous. My parents were ashamed. I was abandoned. Case closed. Life does not work like a case file. People can be guilty and regretful, cowardly and loving, sorry and still responsible. My parents are part of Lucy's life now. Carefully. Slowly. I do not pretend the missing years vanished. Grant has not contacted me. I have not contacted him. Maybe someday one of us will. Maybe we will not. Last week, Lucy asked me what the hearing had actually been about. I told her the simplest version I could. Someone told a lie, and then kept making choices to protect it. She thought about that. Did you fix it? I looked toward the kitchen, where one of Mom's old recipe cards now sat beside my coffee maker. Then at the Navy photographs on the wall. Then at my daughter. Some of it. Lucy nodded like that was a perfectly acceptable answer. That counts. Yeah. It does.